The phone call came at 11:32 a.m. on a Thursday in late September. I was in my workshop behind the house, sanding down a cedar plank for the canoe I'd been building all summer. The northern Ontario sun was warm on my back, and I could hear the loons calling from the lake. My phone buzzed in my pocket. My brother-in-law, Richard's name, lit up the screen. We'd just seen each other 2 days ago at the office, so a midday call seemed odd. I answered, expecting maybe he'd forgotten some paperwork. Instead, his voice came through strained, almost theatrical in its seriousness. "Thomas," he said, and I could hear him take a breath like he was steeling himself. "I need to talk to you about something serious. About your health. Susan and I have been talking, and we think it's time you faced reality. The doctors gave you 6 months, maybe less. I know this is hard, but we need to discuss the business transition. Miller Timber can't just stop when the time comes." I stood there, wood shavings clinging to my flannel shirt, the sandpaper still in my hand. For a moment, I genuinely wondered if I'd missed something. If there'd been some medical appointment I'd forgotten, some diagnosis that had slipped my mind. "Richard, what are you talking about? What doctors?" His voice shifted, became firmer, almost patronizing. "Thomas, denial isn't healthy. Susan showed me the paperwork. Stage 4. The oncologist at Sunnybrook was very clear. I'm sorry, brother, but we need to be practical. I'm prepared to take over as CEO immediately. You'll stay on as chairman in name only, of course, but the day-to-day operations need someone healthy, someone who'll be around." Then came the part that made my blood run cold. "And Thomas, I've already started the paperwork to buy out your shares. 200,000. That's more than fair given the circumstances. Susan agrees it's best for everyone. The company needs stability, and frankly, you need to focus on getting your affairs in order. Don't fight this. It's what's best for the family." He hung up before I could respond. I stood in that workshop, surrounded by the smell of cedar and varnish, my hands shaking slightly. Not from fear of dying, because I knew something Richard didn't know. I wasn't sick. I'd never been to Sunnybrook for oncology. I'd had my annual physical 3 weeks ago, and Dr. Chen had given me a clean bill of health. Blood pressure a bit high, cholesterol slightly elevated, but for a 62-year-old man who'd spent 40 years in the timber industry, I was doing remarkably well, which meant Richard was lying. And if Richard was lying about me dying, what else was he lying about? Let me back up. My name is Thomas Miller. I'm 62 years old, and I built Miller Timber from nothing. Started with a single truck and a chainsaw 40 years ago, hauling logs out of the bush near Timmins. Grew it into one of the most successful, sustainable forestry operations in northern Ontario. We employ 87 people across 3 locations, from Sudbury to Thunder Bay. Annual revenue last year was $12 million. My wife Susan and I have been married for 34 years. We met at a community dance in North Bay when I was 28 and she was 24. She was a school teacher then, sharp as a tack and twice as beautiful. We had 2 children, Michael, who's 31 now, and teaching at the University of British Columbia, and Emma, 28, a veterinarian in Winnipeg. Good kids. They'd made their own lives, and Susan and I were proud of that. Richard Hayes came into our lives 18 years ago when he married Susan's younger sister, Patricia. He was a chartered accountant, smooth-talking, always dressed well, always seemed to know the right wine to order at restaurants. Patricia was smitten. Susan was happy for her sister. I was cautiously optimistic. 10 years ago, Richard approached me about joining Miller Timber as CFO. His firm had just gone through layoffs, and he was looking for stability. Against my better judgment, I said yes. Family is family, right? And Susan vouched for him. For the first few years, Richard was excellent. Streamlined our accounting, found tax savings I'd never known existed, negotiated better rates with our suppliers. The company grew. I gave him more responsibility, more autonomy. Eventually, he knew the financial side of Miller Timber better than I did. 5 years ago, I made him co-owner, giving him 25% of the shares. Susan thought it was generous. I thought it was smart, keeping talented people invested in the company's success. My children weren't interested in the timber business, and I needed someone who could help me run things as I got older. That decision, I was realizing as I stood in my workshop with Richard's words still echoing in my ears, might have been the worst mistake of my life. I called Susan immediately. She answered on the second ring, her voice careful, measured in a way that wasn't like her usual warmth. "Thomas, I was just about to call you." "Sue, what's this about me being sick? What doctors? What paperwork?" There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "Come home. We need to talk. But Thomas, please don't make this harder than it is. Richard's trying to help. We're all trying to help." I drove home from the workshop, my mind racing. The gravel crunching under my tires on our long driveway sounded too loud, too ominous. Our house sat on 5 acres overlooking Lake Nipissing, a timber frame home I'd built myself over the course of 3 summers, each beam hand-cut and fitted. It had been our dream home. Susan was waiting in the kitchen. She looked tired, older somehow than she had just that morning. On the table in front of her was a folder, official-looking papers visible inside. "Sue, what's going on?" She pushed the folder toward me. "I found these in your desk drawer 3 weeks ago. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for the property tax receipts. And I found them. Thomas, why didn't you tell me?" I opened the folder. Medical documents, or at least they looked medical. Sunnybrook Hospital letterhead. A diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, stage 4, dated 6 months ago. Prognosis, 6 to 12 months. Recommended treatment, palliative care. The signature at the bottom was illegible, some Dr. J. Patterson. My hands went cold. The documents looked real. The letterhead was correct. The medical terminology was accurate. But I'd never seen them before in my life. "Susan, I've never been to Sunnybrook. I've never seen Dr. Patterson. This isn't real." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thomas, please. I know it's scary. I know you're in denial." But Richard explained everything. He said it's common for patients with terminal diagnoses to block it out, to refuse to accept it. He's been so supportive these past few weeks, helping me understand what we're facing. "These past few weeks? You've known about this for 3 weeks and didn't talk to me? You weren't ready to talk about it," Richard said, "to give you space, to let you come to terms with it in your own time. But now time's running out, and we need to make plans." I sat down heavily at our kitchen table. The same table where we'd had thousands of meals, where we'd helped our kids with homework, where we'd celebrated anniversaries and birthdays. My wife of 34 years was looking at me like I was already a ghost. "Susan, listen to me carefully. I am not sick. I have never been to Sunnybrook. These documents are fake. I don't know how they were created, but they're not real. Think about it. Have I seemed sick? Lost weight? Been in pain? Anything?" She hesitated, and I could see doubt creeping into her eyes. "Well, no, but Richard said pancreatic cancer can be asymptomatic until the very end. He said you might seem fine and then just deteriorate rapidly." "And you believe Richard over me? Over your own husband? He's family, Thomas. Why would he lie?" That was the question, wasn't it? Why would Richard lie about me dying? And then it hit me, 200,000 for my shares. In a company worth, at current market value, roughly $15 million. My 75% stake was worth over $11 million. Richard was trying to buy me out for $200,000. But he needed me to believe I was dying. Needed Susan to believe it. Needed everyone to believe it so that when I sold my shares for pennies on the dollar, it would seem reasonable. A dying man liquidating assets, not wanting to burden his family with business complications. It was brilliant, in a sociopathic kind of way. "Susan, I need you to trust me. I'm going to prove to you that I'm not sick, but I need you to do something for me. Don't tell Richard about this conversation. Don't tell him anything. Can you do that?" She looked uncertain, torn between her husband and her brother-in-law. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, but Thomas, if you're wrong, if you are sick and you're just not accepting it, promise me you'll get help." I promise. That afternoon, I drove to Sudbury and walked into Dr. Chen's office without an appointment. His receptionist, Marlene, who'd known me for 15 years, looked surprised. Thomas, is everything okay? I need to see Dr. Chen right away. It's urgent. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Dr. Chen, a calm, methodical man in his 50s who'd been my family doctor since we'd moved to the area. Dr. Chen, I need you to run every test you can think of. Full blood work, imaging, everything. And I need documentation of the results. He frowned. Thomas, we just did your physical 3 weeks ago. Everything was fine. What's changed? I showed him the fake Sunnybrook documents. His frown deepened. This is very concerning, but not for medical reasons. Thomas, I've never referred you to Sunnybrook. I don't know any Dr. J. Patterson in their oncology department. And these lab values here, they're inconsistent. This CA 19-9 marker would indicate advanced pancreatic cancer, but your recent blood work showed nothing abnormal. If you'd had these levels 6 months ago, you'd be symptomatic by now. Significant weight loss, jaundice, pain. You'd probably be dead, frankly. So, these are definitely fake? Without question. The question is, who created them and why? I told him about Richard, about the buyout offer, about Susan finding the documents in my desk drawer where I'd never put them. Dr. Chen's expression hardened. This is fraud, possibly elder abuse, though you're not quite elderly yet. He allowed himself a small smile. I'll run a full panel today, have results by tomorrow. But Thomas, I can tell you right now, you're not dying. At least not from cancer. The tests confirmed what I already knew. Healthy, no cancer, no terminal illness. Dr. Chen prepared a detailed report, signed and notarized, documenting my clean bill of health. Armed with this, I could have confronted Richard immediately, could have had him arrested for fraud. But something stopped me. If Richard had gone this far, created fake medical documents, manipulated my wife, tried to steal my company for a fraction of its worth, what else had he done? What else was he planning? I needed to know the full scope of his betrayal before I acted. I called an old friend, Jack Morrison, who'd retired from the OPP 5 years ago and now worked as a private investigator in North Bay. We'd gone to high school together, played hockey on the same team, stayed friends through the decades. Jack, I need your help, and I need complete discretion. We met at a Tim Hortons off Highway 11, away from town where nobody would recognize us. I laid out everything. The phone call, the fake documents, the buyout offer, Susan's manipulation. Jack listened, taking notes in a small notebook he pulled from his jacket. When I finished, he sat back, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. Tom, this is serious. If he's forging medical documents, he's committed fraud. But you're right to want to know more before you act. Let me dig into his finances, see what I can find. Give me a week. It took 3 days. Jack called me on Sunday evening. Can you come by my office tomorrow morning? Early. I found some things you need to see. Monday morning, I was at Jack's office at 7 a.m. He had 3 laptops open, documents spread across his desk. Tom, sit down. This is worse than we thought. Over the next hour, Jack showed me what he'd uncovered. Richard had been embezzling from Miller Timber for at least 4 years. Small amounts at first, carefully hidden in the accounting, buried in legitimate expenses. Inflated supplier costs where Richard pocketed the difference. Phantom consulting fees paid to shell companies he controlled. Equipment purchases that never quite matched the inventory. The total? Nearly $900,000. But that's not all, Jack continued. 3 months ago, Richard took out a $2 million life insurance policy on you. He's listed as the beneficiary. My blood went cold. How is that even possible? I never signed anything. He used his power of attorney. Apparently, you gave him limited POA 5 years ago for business purposes, to sign contracts when you were out of town. He's been expanding its use. So he creates fake documents saying I'm dying, tries to buy my shares for nothing, and takes out life insurance on me. Jack, what do you think happens when I refuse to sell? Jack's expression was grim. I think he tries to make the diagnosis real. Tom, this isn't just fraud anymore. This is conspiracy to commit murder. We sat in silence for a moment. This was my brother-in-law, Patricia's husband, the man who came to our family dinners, who'd been at both my children's weddings, who Susan trusted implicitly. What do I do? We go to the police. Now. Today. But I shook my head. Not yet. If we move now, we might not get everything. Richard's smart. He's been planning this for months, maybe years. He'll have contingencies. I want to catch him in the act. I want him to incriminate himself so thoroughly that there's no way out. Tom, that's dangerous. I know, but I built this company from nothing. I'm not letting him steal it, and I'm not letting him get away with planning my murder. Jack studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, but we do this smart. We get the police involved, but quietly. Set up surveillance, wiretaps, if we can get warrants. Document everything. Over the next week, we put together our plan. Jack contacted his former colleagues at the OPP. They were very interested in attempted murder and large-scale fraud. We got court orders for wiretaps on Richard's phone and office. We installed hidden cameras in my office at Miller Timber, in my workshop, even in my home with Susan's unknowing participation. Susan still thought I was in denial about being sick. I hated lying to her, hated watching her worry, but I couldn't risk her accidentally tipping off Richard. Not yet. The evidence started piling up fast. Richard on the phone with Patricia, talking about how they'd use the insurance money to buy a place in Florida. Richard, meeting with a shady character Jack identified as a former pharmaceutical rep who'd lost his license for selling prescription medications illegally. And then, 10 days after Richard's initial phone call, came the most damning evidence yet. I was in my workshop, the camera hidden in a hollowed-out book on the shelf, recording everything. Richard showed up unannounced, which wasn't unusual. We'd often talk business in the workshop, away from the office. Thomas, we need to talk about the transition plan, he said, settling into the old chair I kept by the workbench. Richard, I've been thinking about that. I'm not ready to sell my shares. I'm not ready to step down. His jaw tightened. Thomas, we've been through this. You're sick. You need to accept reality. I'm not sick. I went to Dr. Chen. He ran every test imaginable. I'm perfectly healthy. For just a moment, I saw something flash in Richard's eyes. Anger. Panic. Then it was gone, replaced by concern. Tom, did you tell Dr. Chen about Sunnybrook, about Dr. Patterson's diagnosis? There is no Dr. Patterson. Those documents are fake, Richard. I know what you're doing. He stood up, and his whole demeanor changed. The concerned brother-in-law disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. You know, Tom, I'd hoped you'd make this easy. Just sell the shares, fade away quietly. But you always were stubborn. Why, Richard? Why do all this? He laughed, actually laughed. Why? Because I've spent 10 years watching you play lumberjack, pretending to be some salt-of-the-earth working man, while sitting on a fortune. You don't even appreciate what you have. Miller Timber could be worth $50 million with the right management, the right expansion. But you're content with your little sustainable forestry operation, your hand-cut beams and your canoes. You're wasting potential. So you decided to steal it. I decided to take what I deserve. I've run this company while you've played in your workshop. I've made the real decisions. And when you're gone, permanently gone, I'll finally get to run it properly. The admission hung in the air between us. The camera caught every word. You're talking about killing me. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm talking about helping you along with your diagnosis. A little something in your coffee, maybe. Morphine overdose. Tragic, but expected for a man in the terminal stages of cancer. Susan will be devastated, but she'll have me to lean on. Patricia, too. And the insurance money will help them both through their grief. You're insane. I'm practical. And Tom, you can either take the $200,000 and disappear somewhere to live out your remaining healthy years, or you can fight me and die anyway. Your choice, but make it fast. My patience is running out. He left without another word. I sat in my workshop, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from rage. This man had sat at my table, eaten my food, smiled at my wife, and plotted my murder for money. Jack and the OPP had heard everything. By evening, they had enough for multiple arrest warrants. But I asked them to wait just a bit longer. I want Susan to see who he really is. She'll never believe it otherwise. The next day, I told Susan I'd reconsidered, that I was ready to sign over my shares to Richard. She was relieved, thinking I'd finally accepted my fate. It broke my heart to see her like that, but I needed her there for what came next. We arranged a signing ceremony at our house for Saturday afternoon. Richard, Patricia, Susan, me, and Richard's lawyer, a sour-faced man named Thompson, who'd been helping him draw up the paperwork. What Richard didn't know was that Jack and two OPP detectives were in the next room, recording everything. Richard arrived with champagne. The audacity of it would have been funny if it wasn't so sick. "To new beginnings," he said, pouring glasses for everyone. "Tom, this is the right choice. For everyone." Susan was crying softly, thinking this was her husband's resignation to death. Patricia looked uncomfortable, probably knowing more than she wanted to admit. The documents were spread on our dining room table. $200,000 for 75% of Miller Timber. The biggest theft in Northern Ontario history, about to be finalized. I picked up the pen, held it over the signature line. Then I set it down. "Richard, before I sign, I have a question. Why did you take out a $2 million life insurance policy on me 3 months ago?" The room went silent. Susan's head snapped up. "What?" Richard's face drained of color. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really? Because I have the documentation right here." I pulled out the policy documents Jack had obtained. $2 million, payable to Richard Hayes upon my death. Signed, using a power of attorney. I gave you for business purposes only. That's fraud, Richard. Patricia stood up. "Richard, what is he talking about?" "And while we're asking questions," I continued, "maybe you can explain these." I pulled out the bank records, showing his embezzlement. $900,000 stolen from Miller Timber over 4 years. Or these. The fake medical documents. Forged medical records. Or maybe you'd like to explain to Susan what you said in my workshop 3 days ago. I nodded toward the next room. Jack and the detectives entered. Detective Williams was carrying a laptop. "What's happening?" Susan asked, her voice small. "We're going to watch a video," I said, "and then you'll understand everything." Williams set up the laptop and played the workshop recording. Richard's voice filled the room, cold and clear. "I'm talking about helping you along with your diagnosis. A little something in your coffee, maybe. Morphine overdose. Tragic, but expected for a man in the terminal stages of cancer." Susan's face went white. Patricia made a sound like she'd been punched. Richard lunged for the door, but Detective Williams was faster. "Richard Hayes, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, forgery, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." The rest happened in a blur. Patricia collapsing into a chair, sobbing. Susan staring at me like she didn't know who I was. Richard shouting about lawyers and false accusations as they led him away in handcuffs. Thompson, the lawyer, tried to slip out quietly. "I want him investigated too," I told Williams. "He helped draw up fraudulent contracts." Thompson's briefcase hit the floor. The legal proceedings took 8 months. Richard tried every defense his expensive lawyers could think of. Claimed the workshop conversation was taken out of context. Claimed the embezzlement was just accounting errors. Claimed the life insurance was a legitimate business precaution. But the evidence was overwhelming. Audio recordings, video footage, bank records, forged documents, testimony from the pharmaceutical rep who'd agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. The prosecutor called it one of the most clear-cut cases of attempted murder and fraud she'd seen in 20 years. In the end, Richard pleaded guilty to avoid a longer sentence. He got 12 years in federal prison, was ordered to repay the $900,000 he'd stolen plus penalties, and forfeited any claim to his shares in Miller Timber. His accounting license was permanently revoked. Patricia filed for divorce before the trial even started. She'd known about some of the financial impropriety, but claimed she didn't know about the murder plot. The investigation suggested she was telling the truth. She moved back to Ottawa to live with her elderly mother, devastated and humiliated. Thompson, the lawyer, was disbarred for knowingly participating in fraud. The Professional Misconduct Tribunal was not kind. As for Susan and me, it took time. She was devastated that she'd believed Richard over me, that she'd been so easily manipulated. The fake medical documents had looked so real, and Richard had been so convincing in his concern. We went to counseling, worked through her guilt and my resentment at not being trusted. "I should have known," she said one night. "He was family. You wanted to trust him. That's not a character flaw, Sue. That's being human." Slowly, we rebuilt. Not just our marriage, but our sense of security, our ability to trust. It helped that Michael and Emma came home for extended visits. Having our children around, seeing their support and love, reminded us what family was supposed to be. Miller Timber survived, even thrived. I brought in a new CFO, a woman named Jennifer Park, who came with impeccable references and a reputation for absolute integrity. She helped me install new financial controls, multiple approval requirements, regular third-party audits. It would be much harder for anyone to steal from the company again. We also used some of the recovered embezzled funds to start a foundation. The Northern Ontario Elder Protection Fund provides resources for seniors dealing with financial abuse, fraud, and exploitation. Susan threw herself into the work, channeling her guilt into helping others avoid what she'd almost helped happen to me. Jack Morrison became head of security for Miller Timber. He joked that it was the easiest job he'd ever had since I'd learned to be properly paranoid. 1 year after Richard's sentencing, I was back in my workshop, finally finishing that cedar canoe I'd started building when this all began. Susan came out with 2 cups of coffee, set them on the workbench, and watched me work. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "The way we handled things? Letting it play out instead of just confronting him immediately?" I ran my hand over the smooth wood, feeling the grain under my fingers. Sometimes it was dangerous. Could have gone wrong in a dozen ways. But Sue, if we'd just confronted him, he would have denied everything, destroyed evidence, maybe gotten away with it. This way, we got him on everything. The fraud, the embezzlement, the attempted murder. All of it. He was going to kill you. He was. But he didn't, and now he can't hurt anyone else. She was quiet for a moment, then asked the question I knew had been bothering her. "Do you think he ever really cared about us? About family?" I thought about all the dinners, the holidays, the years of smiles and conversations. I think he cared about what we represented, success he wanted for himself, money he thought he deserved. But genuine love? Genuine loyalty? No. Richard only ever cared about Richard. "I'm sorry I didn't trust you." I set down my sandpaper and pulled her close. "You did trust me. Eventually, when it mattered. That's what counts." We stood there in the workshop, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows, the smell of cedar in the air, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Safe, secure, home. The canoe was almost finished. I'd take it out on the lake soon, paddle out to where the water was deep and clear, where the loons called and the fish jumped. Susan would come with me, like she always did. We'd survived Richard's betrayal, survived his greed and his violence, and we'd come out stronger. That's the thing about family. Real family. It's not about blood or marriage certificates. It's about trust, about showing up, about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. Richard was family by marriage, but he stopped being family the moment he chose money over people, the moment he valued his own ambitions over a life. Susan and I, we chose each other. 40 years of choices, some good, some bad, but always choosing to stay, to fight for us. That's what survived Richard's scheme. That's what he could never touch or steal or poison. Sometimes I think about him in prison, 12 years stretching ahead of him. I wonder if he regrets it, if he understands what he threw away. Probably not. Men like Richard don't really change. They just get caught. But me? I learned something valuable. I learned that you can't take trust for granted, even with family. Maybe especially with family. I learned that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most capable of hurting you. And I learned that when someone shows you who they really are, when they drop the mask and reveal the monster underneath, you have to believe them. Richard showed me who he was in that workshop when he casually discussed murdering me over a cup of coffee. I believed him, and I made sure everyone else believed him too. The canoe is finished now. It sits on the shore, red cedar gleaming in the sunlight, perfectly balanced and ready for the water. I built it myself, every plank and rib, just like I built this life. Nobody can take that from me. Not Richard, not anyone. And when I paddle out into the deep water with Susan beside me, when we're surrounded by nothing but lake and sky and the sound of our paddles cutting through the water, I know what real wealth is. It's not the company or the house or the money in the bank. It's this, these moments, this person beside me, this life we've built together, stronger for having survived someone trying to tear it apart. Richard tried to steal my business. He tried to steal my life. But he couldn't steal this. He couldn't steal us. And in the end, that's what really matters. That's what victory looks like. Not revenge, not even justice, though that was satisfying. Victory is still being here, still paddling, still building things with my own two hands, while the man who tried to destroy me sits in a cell counting the days. I won. We won. And every morning I wake up healthy and free. That victory feels a little sweeter.